Well, we have been waiting for quite some time for the news that I'll be breaking down with you, and I'll be joined by our legal expert, Aaron Parnas. Thanks for joining us, Aaron. So this is really big. Weeks and weeks and weeks have been passing by as we're waiting to get the decision out of the Supreme Court on the presidential immunity. Trump's legal team is trying to prevent the prosecution of Trump, or at least certain aspects of it, from the federal January 6th related attempts to block the peaceful transfer of power related case, brought, of course, by Jack Smith against Trump. And their argument is Trump, as president, is afforded immunity that protects him from being prosecuted for those actions. And finally, the Supreme Court has ruled on this. I'll let you break down for the audience the summary, and then I already have a bunch of questions as to how this impacts. And I can't overstate how consequential this is. If you've been following Trump's legal cases, this, aside from the conviction, is one of the biggest bits of news that we've received. Aaron, break it down for us.
Yeah, so from a very high level perspective, the court ruled today that Donald Trump is immune for all official acts taken while in office, but not immune for all unofficial acts taken while in office. And we can break that down because it's a bit of a complicated decision. But in essence, Donald Trump not only got the immunity he wanted, but he got more from this court. This court was a 6-3 decision with all the conservative justices in the majority. Justice Roberts wrote for the court, with 3 liberal justices dissenting, and you had a dissent from both Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson. Essentially, what this court ruled today was that any action taken within the official scope of his office, Donald Trump is absolutely immune. So is any other president in American history, prior and any future presidents. But any unofficial act taken in his private capacity, he is not immune for. But the way this decision is written essentially throws into doubt a lot of the prosecutions and a lot of the indictments that Trump is facing, especially this January 6th indictment, because now it goes back to DC Judge Chutkan to decide whether specifically Donald Trump's communications with Vice President Mike Pence after the November 2020 election would constitute an official act. If they do, then the Jack Smith indictment theoretically will likely have to be either substantially modified or even potentially dismissed, because most of the actions alleged in the indictment relate to Trump's duties as president. Now, Jack Smith's team has argued that those were unofficial acts. So essentially, this is going to be litigated in front of Judge Chutkan and will likely make its way back up to the Supreme Court.
So just as a reminder to everyone, Judge Tanya Chutkan is overseeing this case at issue. And to what you're saying, it sounds like she's going to have some discretion in defining the official, unofficial in the ruling from the Supreme Court. Was that outlined at all? Because great, now you've said there is immunity for official presidential acts, which some people sort of intuitively can think, okay, that makes sense. If you're directing the military and some war zone to do something, a president being prosecuted could get complicated. But now you have unofficial acts, you're not immune. That also makes sense. But how do you make that distinction, especially when you get in this fishy territory of Trump as the president calling officials doing something that's, in my mind, not an official act as president, trying to get them to fraudulently overturn results?
Yeah, so I think the dissents actually point this out. The majority is generally unclear as to how to define specifically an official act. And the majority didn't specifically say one thing is official while one thing is unofficial. They kind of left that up to Judge Chutkan to decide. But there are a couple key points in the majority's opinion as it relates to this. Number one, the conservative justices said that Donald Trump is, quote, presumptively immune from allegations that he tried to pressure Mike Pence to reject the certification of President Biden's win on January 6th. Now, that was a big part of the indictment. So now, essentially what they're saying is that Jack Smith's team has to rebut that presumption, has to put forth evidence that Donald Trump would not be presumptively immune because that, for whatever reason, is not an official act. That is a large part of the indictment. Another part of the indictment relates to Donald Trump enlisting the Justice Department to lie about the potential election fraud in 2020. That part will likely now have to be thrown out because that, in this Supreme Court's view, is likely an official act. But ultimately, it will be up to Judge Chutkan. No matter what Judge Chutkan decides, what's going to happen is you're going to see appeals all the way back up to the Supreme Court again. In a lot of ways, this just punted the issue for the future. But look, one key point between pages 30 and 32 of the majority's opinion, not only did the conservative justices say that a president is absolutely immune from all official acts, but they also said that any evidence related to those official acts cannot come into any trial. And that not only threatens the January 6th indictments, but it also threatens the New York falsification of business records case, which Trump has already been found guilty in. Because if you recall, some of the evidence that the indictment was based on were Donald Trump's actions while in office, whether the signing of a check or other things Trump took while in office. So theoretically, this throws into doubt his potential convictions in New York, not just future trials in DC, Georgia, and Florida. So not only is this, and that's not something Donald Trump even specifically asked for. This is not just a big win for Trump because he got this absolute immunity for official actions, but this court kind of went above and beyond here.
Oh, this is so aggravating. So, okay, my first question, since you brought up the case he's been convicted in, the falsification of business records, how do you, other than saying just anything that's done as president, how do you define essentially what acts as him as a businessman and a now former presidential candidate is what these things were relating to? But yeah, he was doing some of this in the White House. How could you make a compelling argument that was him acting in his official capacity as president?
Well, that's kind of the point of the dissents, right? The majority doesn't really give a conclusive test as to what it means to conduct an official act. Now, there are clear-cut official acts that a president takes, right? Pardoning someone. That is an official act that he cannot be prosecuted for, even if, under this opinion, theoretically, Donald Trump could have sold a pardon while president, and that may be covered, and he may not be able to be prosecuted, because that is an official act. But something like signing a check, it's 50-50, right? It was taken while president within, it was in the Oval Office, it was done. He could argue while it was as an official act, but ultimately that's going to be up to the lower courts to decide. And this is a common theme with this court this term. They're throwing into doubt so many precedents, so many prior opinions, and now throwing a wrench into by creating this new doctrine of absolute immunity without really defining its parameters. And it's just going to create more litigation, more fighting in lower courts, and this court's just going to be busier at the end of the day. So ultimately, I don't know what an official act is. This court doesn't really define what an official act is, and it's going to be up to Judge Chutkan to define it. And then I guarantee you if he is not elected president, this will be back in front of the Supreme Court next year.
So for our audience, we're sort of getting this all right now as we're recording this segment. And so a lot is just sort of bouncing around in my head. I'll try to coherently present these questions to you, Aaron. But one of the things we briefly discussed right before hopping on was how effectively, so for the audience, the strategy from the Trump side since day one has been delay, trying to push back everything, at least past the election. Explain for the viewers and myself how this impacts the likelihood that really any case is going to happen before, other than the one he's already convicted in, before the election.
Oh, look, I would bet my entire life savings on the fact that Donald Trump is not going to go to trial in any other case before the election. I mean, this decision kind of guaranteed that, because it's going to take, if the Supreme Court today ruled that Donald Trump was absolutely not immune for any action, the earliest the January 6th trial would have been able to start is September, which is 2 months before the election. But now that we have this kind of middle ground test situation, that alone is going to take multiple months to decide. And at that point, you're not going to have a trial until next year sometime. So there is less than 1% chance that any case goes to trial. We know Judge Cannon's been pushing things off. That's not happening. That's not going to trial. There's no chance there. Fannie Willis, that case has stayed pending a decision by the Georgia Court of Appeals. So that's not happening. And that case will last apparently 6 to 9 months anyway. And then this was the January 6th prosecution in DC was the most likely to go to trial. But now with this decision, I mean, good luck. It's not happening. And no one should expect it to happen.
And somehow you have many people who are defenders of Trump able to live in this world where they believe Trump's being treated worse at every single turn by every single system and everything's rigged against him, when in reality this is going, aside from him being indicted obviously, but this is going exactly how he would have wished, and maybe aside from the conviction. But with so many of these cases, whether it be Cannon, who's a Trump appointee overseeing one of them, or the Supreme Court, not only giving, like you said, a decision out that is sort of favorable to him or conceding on some of the arguments his lawyers were making, but also serves to put things up in the air longer. And it's crazy to me that after all of this, there wouldn't be just a really concise ruling that leaves nothing to be wondered. Because now, like you said, Judge Chutkan's going to define the parameters. Then Jack Smith's team will probably have to sort of resituate. And then whatever Chutkan rules, Trump's team is going to want to challenge. So it's going to spin everything out. And now we won't get, for even separate from just wanting to see justice sooner rather than later, for the American people, it is valuable for them to know whether or not Trump is guilty of the crimes relating to the last time he was president and him trying to throw out our democratic process altogether. Are there any notable parts, I know you just had a chance to sort of review, but of the dissent other than what we've talked about that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately Justice Sotomayor's dissent is one that I think everyone watching today should really read. I want to read one paragraph from the dissent, the final words from her dissent. She said, quote, "Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity if the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain. The criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent." I think that is a very kind of powerful encapsulation of what this kind of opinion means, is that now moving forward, any president could use his official office as president for personal gain, and he cannot be prosecuted. It essentially means that Donald Trump, as president, could walk on Fifth Avenue, shoot someone, claim that it is within his official capacity as president, and not be prosecuted. It is a very, very dangerous decision.
And to the MAGA folks, cheering, celebrating, enthusiastic, remember this applies to all presidents, so chill out a little bit because Biden's the president right now. And while I respect our democracy too much to want what I'm about to say, this does mean, at least the argument being made from Trump's team and semi-sided with from the Supreme Court, that if Trump does win, there's a whole host of things that Biden could do, quote unquote, within his official acts to try to prevent Trump from coming into office, which again, I don't want. As much as I hate Trump, I respect the democratic process and the say of the American people, but that's what Trump tried to do. That's what he's saying he shouldn't be prosecuted for. So just understand, MAGA, this applies across the board, even though maybe you rely on the fact that your opposition respects democracy and our Constitution more than you do. Aaron, thank you so much for being with us, explaining this all. Where can people find you?
Just on all my social platforms at Aaron Parnas.